The longest span of time where there was not a yontif was between Sukkot and Pesach, right? So it's not accidental. Nothing is accidental, but when I say not accidental, I mean it's a little bit easier for us to appreciate it. It's more overtly not accidental that the two rabbinic Yom Tovim, Chanukah and Purim, fall out between this long gap. We could look at it like a highway where you have stations to refuel. You can go a certain amount of mileage without refueling. Klal Yisrael in history would need refueling. Every yontif is a fueling station. It gives us the spiritual energy to travel further through the year. Loshen that we say from Tilim, we say it in Hallel, Isru Chag Ba'avosim Ad Kanos HaMizbeach. We tie ourselves to the yontif. We bring it with us. The yontif hasn't ended. We've gotten something from the yontif, and we move forward with what it is that we took from the yontif. That's fundamentally in the relationship between the Jew and yontif. The difference between Kedushas Shabbos and Kedushas Yontif. A thumbnail, somebody? Difference between Kedushas Shabbos, besides the Isa Malochas. In the Kedusha, Be'etzem. It's a little bit louder.
Kedusha Shabbos, it's on its own, it's on Atzma.
Exactly. The Rebbeinu, we say in Davening, the Rebbeinu is Mekadesh as her Shabbos. And in Yontif, what do we say? Mekadesh Yisrael v'hazmanin. There's a Ramban, that the Ramban says, many people learn that Motzi Shabbos in Havdalah, you take the Psomim. Why do you take Psomim?
You lose the Neshama Yisera.
Because you're losing the Neshama Yisera. Yontif, you don't take Psomim when you make Havdalah. So many people conclude from that what does it mean? That you don't have it in the Neshama Yisera. Says the Ramban, no. The Neshama Yisera of Yontif doesn't leave because you created it. Mekadesh Yisrael v'azmanim. Bezdin is Mekadesh the Yontif, and because Bezdin is Mekadesh the Yontif, then that will determine Mekadesh the Chodesh, and that will determine when Yontif will fall out. So, I'm sorry, a little bit louder.
Is that possibly why you say Shechiyonu and only Yontif and then Shabbos you don't say?
Yeah, it's also that it pashtas technically in halacha. It's because the span of time, Shabbos is every 7 days. It's Kviya V'Kaima. But it could be on a rayoni level that's why it works like that. That's why it comes out. So the two rabbinic Yom Tovim are Yom Tovim that are Chazal initiated. Now, it's interesting, historically, what came first? The Maisa of Purim or the Maisa of Chanukah? Purim. Because that was the building, that was in order to get the Ishur, the certification, to be able to build Bayis Sheni. And then we had it had to be inaugurated and rededicated because of how it had been defiled by the Greeks. That came later. In our calendar, we get Chanukah first. So it's also an interesting shaila. Why would it work out? Again, nothing is accidental. So there must be some possible message in that. So let's go back now to historically, approximately 100 years before the Maisa of the Hashmonaim, there was a Greek culture king in Alexandria, Talmai. And Talmai ordered 70 skenim, 70 sages of the Jewish people to come to Alexandria, did not tell them in advance why they were being called, placed each one in a separate cubicle, no time for consultation, no time for conferring, and ordered them to translate the written law into Greek. Lamaisa, there was an S. They all came out the exact same translation. The exact same translation, even using euphemisms, words to be politically correct so as not to antagonize him or confuse him or get him into issues that they didn't want to discuss with him. And the Gemara lists 33 places where one example is that by the creation of man, the Pasuk says, Na'aseh Odom. Na'aseh is plural. We. What do you mean we? The Rebbe Shem is creating man. Why Rashi brings the Chazal? What's the reason that it says we? I'm sorry? The Kodesh Baruch Hu consulted with the Bezdin Shel Mala. Does he have to consult? Obviously not. Rebbe Shem doesn't do anything. But it was to be instructive to teach us that we who need to consult should have consult. Okay, so there were such 33 places. So it was an S. But the Medrash says that though it was an S, 3 days of darkness descended upon the world. Why? Because the Greeks were able to say, you don't have to go to Panovich, Mir, Chaim Berlin, Ohr Somayach. You can come to the university library in Alexandria, and it's cataloged. It's on the shelf. It's there. So it was promoting assimilation. The point was to encourage. It's a great culture. The term that's used idiomatically in English is damning with faint praise. You give weak praise and then you lock it in at that level, not allowing it to go higher. So they were giving, it's a compliment, it's a culture that they want, but that's all it is. It's nothing more. It's a culture, just like every other culture. It's a reductionism of our claim, our tainus, and how we view what Torah, Nevuah, Ruach HaKodesh is all about. Now, there's a paradox there. Seems to be a stira. Nes! But it was a nes that there was a great price paid for the nes. So that was about 100 years before the Maaseh with the Hashmonaim. The Greeks won that battle. It did promote Hellenism. Jews that were becoming acculturated. But they didn't win the war. Why didn't they win the war? Because there was still a garin, a core that were committed to Torah Shebal Peh. And Torah Shebal Peh, the Greeks didn't have. They didn't have that. And Torah Shebal Peh is all the difference in the world on how to understand the text. Pre-COVID, I traveled on the average of once a month, and in one of my trips, coming back to Eretz Yisrael, the Rebbeinu Shalom, in his cosmic sense of humor, placed me next to an evangelist priest. This fellow was reading the Gideon Bible as we were traveling the whole time. Every once in a while, he would ask me a question, and I tried to be correct, but not encourage expanding the conversation. As we got closer to landing, he was bringing a whole group here. As we got closer to landing, he zeroed in for the kill and started asking me what he understood to be anticipation of the Lahavdil Alfei Avdolos Ofo Lepumayu, the New Testament. So at one point I told him, he said to me, "You're a student of the Bible, aren't you?" I said, "No." He said, "I thought you were a rabbi." I said, "I'm not sure why you thought that. Not everybody with a beard is a rabbi. But afilu Tim Tzalema." And maybe you're paskin like the Rambam, like the afilu Tim Tzalema. That I am a rabbi. I'm not a student of the Bible. He said, "Yeah, but rabbis don't study the Bible?" I said, "No. We study Torah." What's the difference? It's an English translation. So no, you got it wrong. Translation, first of all, any translation is a rewrite of the original. Just like you cannot translate poetry, you can't translate. It's a kal v'chomer, ben beno shel kal v'chomer. Tried to explain a little bit the concept of a fortiori of a kal v'chomer. I gave up after about 4 minutes. That you can't translate nevuah. You can approximate, number one. Number two, we don't look at the text other than through the eyes, the lens of the code, the oral law. And the oral law gives us a methodology on how to read the text. He said to me, "Your law is very, very, you're making it very complicated." I said, "Life is complicated. Why do you think it's not complicated?" It has to reflect life if it's going to apply to life. Anyway, we went up and back. So at one point, his squad came over and they were rooting for him, and some passengers who I didn't know got up and they kind of heard what was going on, so they were rooting for me. It was an interesting challenge. So at one point, there was somebody who had seen a copy of the Talmud and said to me, "I was told that it's unpunctuated. How do you read that stuff?" I said, "Life is unpunctuated. You have to put in the punctuation." That's what it's all about. The code, the oral laws that teach us how to punctuate life, where to put a comma, where to put a semicolon, and where to put a period. Thank you very, very much. I guess they're all out of scotch. By the way, Rav Hutner Zatzal often said that the big ness that you had 70 sages, 70 skenim, Talmidei Chachamim. You put them in separate cubicles, and they all came out with the same translation. But I think, said Rav Hutner, that if you took 70 Talmidei Chachamim and you put them in the same room and they came out with the same translation, it'd be a bigger mess. Why? Because they're legitimate, valid differences of opinion. So let's just talk a moment about the oral law. The oral law, why do we need an oral law? Well, part of the reason would seem to be that the Sefer Ikrim says that we need an oral law because any written text can be open for interpretation. You can put the emphasis here, put the emphasis there, and you need an oral tradition to verify which is the right read of the text. My mashal that I have given over the years to our Talmidim is the story of the Jew in New York, finally saves up enough money to go down to Miami for his first vacation after years of saving. He gets down there in January, it's snowing in New York. He gets down there and he rushes in. He took a cheap hotel, but it's a hotel and they had a pool. He goes running out to the pool and there's a sign, no swimming allowed. All this time, it's beautiful, hot weather. He came down there. It's ridiculous. There's water in the pool. He jumps in, starts swimming. The guard comes running over, pulls him out. Didn't you see the sign? He said, yeah, but that's not how I read it. How did you read it? He says, no, swimming allowed. You have to know how to punctuate. Right? You need an oral tradition to how to punctuate. Where to put the emphasis. If you want Am Yisrael to remain a separate people, if that is the Toyelis, that the Bnei Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov are going to have to be a unique, separate nation, and they are as a nation to impact the world. Do we want Tikkun Olam to improve the whole world? Yes. But how do we go about it? Do you go from the Prat to the Klal, or you go from the Klal to the Prat? Western culture, historically, philosophically, when it's trying to understand a concept like justice, so looks for a general principle, and then to try and apply it in life. That's the point of a principle, to see if it can be applied to life. The artist starts the other way. The artist starts with a particular situation, and what he is trying to do is demonstrate and give tangibility to the idea in a situation. And if you abstract from the situation, you get the idea behind it. That's a serious writer, a serious poet, a serious novelist is trying to do that. So the artist begins with a specific situation, and then he goes from the Prat to the Klal to try and squeeze out of the Prat, the Klal, the concept that's lurking behind there, that's hidden there. But he goes from the Prat to the Klal. Similarly, if you read when it says, the Pasuk says, that Klal Yisrael is a Mamleches Kohanim, let's substitute for the moment Kohanim. It means leaders, leadership over there. Not necessarily Kohanim to be Memayet Leviim and Yisraelim. If, however, we want it to be reintroduced to life, it's going to have a more successful history of being applied in life if it came from life. If you can trace it back to a life situation where it came from the prat to the klal, you can bring it back to the prat more easily, because that's where it began. I would compare it to the idea, let's say, of if you know the yichus of where this klal was born, it's easier to find a shidduch for him to reintroduce him to another life situation, because that's where it came from. It's life connected. That's what it's about. It's about life. So, Torah Sheba'al Peh is a necessity. One, if you want the Jews to remain Jewish. Two, a written document, as the Sefer Ikrim says, that needs an oral tradition of how to verify it and confirm it. Three, it's the Rebbe-Talmud relationship. You're going to need in history the option to innovate and respond to the world that's in flux. The world is changing. That's why text of the oral law has to be unpunctuated. You have to know how to get the implications that are there. It's Beruach HaKodesh, Ramban says in Baba Basra, Daf Yud Beis. There's no Nevuah Bizmanenu, but there is Ruach HaKodesh is in Chazal. So I need an authoritative understanding. This idea is touched on by the Meshech Chochmah in Pashas Va'era. He says that Klal Yisrael in the Midbar were freed of the obligations of earning a parnasa. The man, the bear of Miriam, the Anani Yaakov took care of them, their various needs. So the tzibur was freed and able to devote themselves to learning. That was in order that you should have a literate, sophisticated tzibur. Then, whoever they choose and recognize as their leader, we can have confidence in their decision. Are there rebellions against Moshe? But very limited. We catalog them. We describe them. We report them, because everybody else was on the same page. They endorsed that leadership. And we can take that seriously, number one. Number two, it becomes a model for the Torah community throughout history. The model for the Torah community throughout history will be that Am Yisrael needs a literate community, needs a learned community, and they will in turn make the evaluation of who should be the leadership of any given door. Who are the poskim of the door? The way we've tried to describe it in the past is that in Klal Yisrael, the methodology that it works is that we have a democracy of opportunity, but an aristocracy of opinion. We're interested in the opinion of the experts. Lo aleinu, somebody has some medical needs. We have all kinds of services in the Frum community that research for us and that follow the expertise in any given field. You want an expert. Somebody is told he needs a particular medical procedure, lo aleinu. He gets out on the corner of King George and Yafo, And he said he's going to ask the first 1,000 people that come by, it's a democracy. I'm going to ask the first 1,000 people that come by, do they agree with this diagnosis of the doctor? It's insane. Why? Because one expert, his opinion is more valuable than 1,000 lawyers, shopkeepers, venture capitalists, accountants, whatnot. So we want expertise, and we want a community that is as close as possible to that expertise so that they can evaluate by their consensus who the leadership should be. And some of you have heard me say that Rabbi Yaakov Weinberg, my Rebbe when I was in Baltimore, he would often say that at Maimed Har Sinai, the Rebbeinu Shalom had to, as it were, either stop the world, nothing new would be introduced. So then, a document which is given at a particular place at a specific time in history would always be applicable. Nothing new is introduced. Alternative, the Rebbeinu Shalom allows for a world to change. Not only that, he makes the world such a world that it changes. If it's a world that changes, then I have to be able to deal with a changing world. So I'm going to have that interaction between that which is fixed and continuous and that which is introducing new variables to be reckoned with, new concepts. But I'm taking the old concepts to apply to the new variables. Beautiful mashal is in fact Yitzchak redigs the be'erot that were dug by Avram. The Plishtim had stuffed them up. That'll be again a recurring challenge in history that the Goyim where we are going to try and stuff up the be'er. What's the difference between be'er and bor? I'm sorry? Okay, but I'm sorry, the bear maybe could be raked too.
Or takes in the bear as natural water.
I'm sorry?
Bear is a natural water source.
The be'er is water that's coming from a spring under the ground. The be'er, the water is potentially there, you just have to access it. The bore is filled with water from the outside. It's a reservoir. It catches the water from the outside. So we're talking about digging of be'eros, that the water's there. That it's likened to the idea in Mishlei that Rov Yetzirah, there's much insight, belev odom, be'ish tvunos, but a man of understanding, yidlen, he'll draw it up. It's there. But you have to know how to get to it. You have to know how to access it. So, what does Yitzchak do? He digs the same beirot that Avram dug. He calls them the same names as Avram called them. A name describes its essence, the core of what it is, the yesod, the essence of what it is, but he uses his tools. Every generation has to use their tools to be able to. So there's a time when Torah Sheba'al Peh remains Torah Sheba'al Peh, and there's a time when it's going to have to be written down. Going with that mahalach that we have from Chazal, that Rebbe was Eis Lases Lashem, Hofer Torasecho, there was a particular heta and necessity to write it down. So the core is going to have to be protected. Halacha is non-negotiable. What's the raya to this interaction between that which can be added, gzeras takonis, minhogim, that can be added, and root halacha, which cannot be? The litmus test will always be, can I daven with such a minyan? if I come from a Litvish community, so lechatchila I go for a minyan, an Ashkenaz minyan that davens my nusach. But I can always daven with a Taimoni minyan, a Vishnitza minyan, a Satma minyan, because they haven't changed core halacha. The root halacha, the shemas of the beiras are the same. The tools used, the minhagim. Why do I need to be able to change minhagim? Because Jews are going to be dispersed all around the world. And they'll be dispersed all around the world. There'll be different challenges economically, politically, culturally in each place that they find themselves. So they have to be able to initiate that kind of rabbinic legislation to protect the core. That's using tools to protect the core. Who's to decide where one ends and the other begins? Only expertise. People that were musmach from the earlier door, that in the continuity, the Rambam writes very, very meticulously what the Seder of the Masoros was, who were the authoritative Shomri HaMaseres in each door, collectively arrived at through being musmach by the earlier door. So Hasemis brings that the Medrash in Shir HaShirim lists that the word Be'er appears 48 times in Torah. Keneged the Memches Dorm Shator Nitnispan. The Kinyan on Torah is being able to strike this balance between the old, the valid, that's true, that must continue, the Maseres, the Shemas that Avram called them, and finding whatever kalim we need in each place and time to be able to go forward and to be mechadish. There are gedolim, and there's an evaluation. Very, very delicate balance between the two. By the lighting of the menorah, the Pasuk says over there, Vayas Aaron Cain. Aaron did as he was commanded. What's the obvious question? The Rebbe Shem told any of us we'd do it, so surely Aaron is not going to fail in fulfilling the rotzen of the Rebbe Shalom. So there's a beautiful Malbim, the Malbim not in the Pirush on Torah. The Malbim has a Sefer Chemdes Ha'oretz. The Malbim writes, you'll take note in the original creation of Or and Choshech in Bereshis, it does not say, it's the only place that it doesn't say Vayi Chen. That Chen is missing. Why is that Chen missing? Because it was that Or was Nignaz, turned out to be not the Or that would be Meshamish the world throughout history. Now, it was temporarily there for whatever reason. It had to appear in the world, leave its impression through that appearance, but not continue. And that's going to be revisited Chanukah. How so? Our Maseres that we have sources in Zohar and the Mefarshim on the menorah, the craftsmanship of the menorah, kafto v'ferach, Rav Tarfon says when somebody says a particularly beautiful svara, he says kafta v'ferach, like the craftsmanship of the menorah. The craftsmanship of the menorah and the light of the menorah symbolize Torah Sheba'al Peh. The Ramban brings that Aaron was appeased, consoled that he did not take place in the korbanos of the Nisiim, and that he would now have the menorah instead. And the menorah would also be on Chanukah. Chanukah would also be a menorah. And Mizbeach, you don't have one, you don't have a Beis Mikdash. What's the obvious question? Is that when you don't have a Beis Mikdash, you don't have the menorah either, but you do have a Chanukah. But there's another question. The Chanukah, every Yisrael lights. It's not a mitzvah which is unique to Kohanim. So where's his consolation? But if you go with the Zohar and with that Mesilas, that he put into the koyach of Torah Sheba'al Peh, he extracted that, derived it from the menorah. And because he derived it from the menorah, then that would give Klal Yisrael the koyach throughout history to be able to be mechadish. There couldn't be a Chanukah without that koyach. So that means that the fact that there's a Chanukah is because Aaron HaKohen put in the koyach, v'yas Aaron Kain, Rashi says, lagid b'shvocha shel Aaron shelo shina. He wasn't mishana, he was mechadish. What's the difference between mishana and mechadish? Mechadish means you're still on the same page. You haven't left the Daled Amos of Halacha. You're adding a minig. You're developing a nusach in correspondence with what the urgency of that climate and that environment and the political and cultural topography of a particular place in a particular time. That koyach Aaron had to put in. He made it possible to be mechadish without being meshana. And that will be the Mesiras through the Deiros. Do we have room to be mechadish? Yeah, it's a big compliment if you say somebody's a mechadish. It's a critique if you say he's meshana. What's the difference? Are you departing from the Daled Amos of Halacha, or you're staying within the Daled Amos of Halacha? You're digging the same beiros that Avram dug and calling them the same name. You're identifying this is what they are essentially, but you're using your tools in each door and in each time. So now, the Greeks, after approximately 100 years, they recognize that they don't have Torah Sheba'al Peh. There's this core of Jews that are still keeping it going. They won a lot of battles, much Hellenism, but they didn't win the war. The Medrash says that correlates with the different Golison. Sayu is Bovel, the Lysias also is Sayu. It says Vayu Vayavahilu Lahavias Haman, that's Boris Umodai. And Choshech is the Greeks. Choshech is the Greeks. And they said, Kisva Keren Ashor, She'en Lechem Chelik B'Elokei Yisrael. Take a look at the Bnei Yisoscha. We're not going to go into it now, but he's got a magnificent piece on this Maimah. Really what he's talking about over there is the koyach of Chiddush, and that's what allowed Klal Yisrael to survive through Golus. It's beautiful. The Bnei Yisoscha said on himself that the shorish of his neshama was Chanukah. His pieces on Chanukah are Ruach HaKodesh, if you want to be reasonable. If you don't want to be reasonable, if you have blind faith, you might, chas v'shalom, try and deny that he had Ruach HaKodesh. I'll call upon him. What's Kisva Keren Ashor? So what I'm telling you now, I once shared with Rav Hutner Zatzal, and I got an issue on it. Because they didn't have Torah Shebal Peh, they realized that after that block of time. So now they said, write down Torah Shebal Peh. Kisva Keren Ashor. What's writing on the Keren Ashor? That's the way they sent a fax, an email in those days. They put it on the corner of the shore and they sent them from place to place. That was the way they communicated. Things might have changed, but there are a lot of blogs by Oxen out there today as well, by Shvorim. By the way, it's an amazing thing. Anybody can put up a blog. It doesn't have to have any credentials or any kind of smicha, any kind of expertise. It doesn't have to be literate. I think that really you have to read blog as oisius glob. It's a glob of words that somebody put up there that doesn't necessarily have a tzura, because he doesn't. There's no way of determining what the tzura should be. Okay, that's just a personal response. The Kisva Keren Ashor, write it down. If it's written, then we can force you to translate the Torah Shebal Peh too. That's lahashkichom es Torasecha. That was the way we could get you. Their goal was a ruchniistic battle, a cultural, spiritual battle to eradicate Klal Yisrael's uniqueness in history as transcending Teva. So it's in the mitzvahs that they took out after that they wanted to erase. Mila, Chodesh, Shabbos, those mitzvahs that testify to the fact that we try and elevate ourselves above Teva. So, lahashkicham, shochoach is also choshech. They were trying to impose a choshech on the world, on Klal Yisrael. And what is our neshek, our arsenal to do battle with that? The Or. What are we referring back to? We're referring back to the Or that was the Or Agonus. That was the Or Agonus that was that chen that was missing, right? By he chen, like the Malbim says. Now it would be brought back, that the candles correspond to the hours, the amount of neirus that we light correspond to the hours that there was that light, and we're retrieving that and reconnecting to that light. So the ultimate paradox comes about. The paradox is that they were trying to lashkicham as Torah, to make us forget our Torah. What's the result? The result is that there's a new yontif, and that new yontif is a yontif of Torah Shebal Peh. Chanukah is the only yontif that we have that doesn't have a ksav. Purim has Megillah. But now, though the Megillah happened first, that there was a Nasev and Nishma of Torah Shebal Peh, and Yetzer Hashem have opportunity to speak about that. But we, historically now, are going to be dealing with the world through the eyes, the lens, the view of Torah Shebal Peh. And that's going to have to happen through Chanukah. And it happens with the Nitzochen over the Greeks, that though they were trying to be memayet, reduce Torah Shebal Peh, what comes out? The ultimate Nitzochen. There's a new yontif that we're going to say, Asher Kiddushanu Mitzasav Tzivanu. That's a rabbinic yontif. That's the yontif of Torah Shebal Peh that celebrates Torah Shebal Peh, that there isn't even a ksav. And it's accepted by all of Klal Yisrael. And that's the ultimate hidur, the beauty of Klal Yisrael. The hidur is our answer, our neshek, our nuclear energy against the yofi of Yefet, of the Greeks. Our koyach of Torah Shebal Peh. So, the Nitzochen, for us, it became necessary that we should experience Chanukah, and from Chanukah be able to go forward to dealing. It's another fueling station. It's another point of energizing spiritually, and it gives Klal Yisrael this koyach. Both Yom Tovim, which are rabbinic, Chanukah and Megillah, are Yom Tovim of the Mishpocha. Rav Hutner Zatzal, again, would often say that what's kept Klal Yisrael in Golus, in dispersion throughout the Deiros, has been the koyach of Mishpocha. And the koyach of Mishpocha, and the definition of Mishpocha, and that the Yontif, every bias is going to have its Chanukiyah, Mahadrin, Mina Mahadrin, to check the Yofi of Yovan. And in the Golus, the Edom is the summation, just like Mitzrayim anticipated all of future Golusin, and it was a vaccination against any Golus so that we would be able to withstand them. Edom is a review, a summation of it. So Rav Hutner Zatzal also said that we're in that portion of Edom, the Yovon Sheba Edom, that it is that emphasis on and worship of beauty, of aesthetics, of art as being the ultimate in the world. lot more to say about that, and we'll leave that in Yitzhak Hashem for another time. So, if there are any questions on what I've tried to share.
Is it possible that the Rebbe is saying that Chanukah, the word, is to maintain the aspect of Torah Baal Peh? Is that possible a better and I guess more accurate answer to the question why is there no Masechta written on Chanukah?
Right, right, and it's all by implication. You
Because
come exactly. You come across it.
Chanukah.
You come across it. My Chanukah. It comes through the halacha. It has to be. You have to access it. You have to know the code of how to access it. You have to be enough of a ben Torah to have the literacy to be able to do so. Lahavdil, there was a time in the United States that they had prohibition. Prohibition meant that they weren't allowed to sell alcohol. So of course there were a lot of bootleggers that made their fortunes, including the Bronfmans in Canada, made their fortune through bootlegging. Second generation, third generation bootleggers, not necessarily going to celebrate that history, but they had what they called speakeasies. Speakeasies meant that they were underground, like Marano taverns, right? That you had to have the password to get in. They wouldn't let you in. Maybe you're a federal agent, right? So you had to know the code. Lahavdil, but yet we can draw an analogy, it's a bit analogous, is you want to have access to what the Torah is saying, the written law, you can't approach it without having the password to get into the Beis Medrash and to get to understand the code. The password is, nobody's going to keep you out. Okay, there was a tkufa, was a main Terche Kibaro, but we're beyond. We're not in that tkufa now. That we're Shimon HaTzadik, right? That's the name of the street here, not accidental, right? That Hamidu Talmidim Harbe. Hayid Memad Talmidim Harbe. You notice the Yiriyah put a little sign right on the wall outside. Rescue Center. Ohr Somayach didn't put that sign, but it's true.
You put the Baal Ohr Somayach that nobody knows on the other entrance.
Somebody was once asking me directions on how to get here. I told him that you come into Yerushalayim on the main road from Tel Aviv before they had the 443. So you come in, so you're up at the top of a hill, you're at Rehov Yirmiyahu. You turn, and it starts a midron, starts a downslope, right? Halfway down, after Yirmiyahu, you reach Bar Ilan. As you've experienced the Yerida. You get to the bottom of the hill, you're at Eshkol. If you want to get to Ohr Somayach, you have to take a right turn. So, the world as it is today is always threatening. The Rebbeinu Shalom has given us a world that's in flux. It's in motion, but we have a Torah. There's that which is fixed, which is non-negotiable, and that's why I can daven with a Satmar minion and a Teimoni minion, because they haven't. I cannot daven with a minion that has tampered with and changed the core nusach of tefillah, or doesn't daven with the mechitza. More about that another time. Last question.
What would you say is today the Yavan against the Torah Shabbat today?
Yovan what?
Kivyachol, the Yavan, like what's fighting today Torah Shabbat?
How are they fighting Torah Shabbat Peh?
What is the challenge today of the Yavan against the Torah Shabbat?
I don't know. I tell you, I would really rephrase your question. I think the question should be, what's not fighting us today? You just open your eyes in the street or any kind of news report. It's unreal. That's things that would have been considered impossible. That the sheker is chogeg, the politically. We have to, in yeshivas, we have to line up, and they send down pakachim, they send down observers to record who's here and who's not here. Every grush has to be justified. And billions of dollars were given without any kind of qualification, criteria, quietly to Arabs. I mean, it's insane. My brother sent me an application for testing for COVID. If anybody wants it, I'll get one guy and I'll give it to you. He sent it to me, I have it, it's still in my email. And it says over there, are you a birthing person? You're not supposed to say woman. A birthing person. Are you a transgender? You're taking from my taxes because of this shigaon, this mishigas, that people transgender to sponsor their operations. I'm not in a campaign against them. But you're asking me to sponsor that? And you're awarding that and requiring that now that is part of the culture of the environment that says that this is a valid option? Okay, I'll end with this. That the Jewish renegade father of psychoanalysis, Freud, he said that there was a very Jewish humor. His Talmud Muvak was somebody named Theodor Reich, and the following story that I'm telling you, he said was Freud's favorite story. Freud told the story of a Jew, let's call him Goldberg. Mr. Goldberg is insane. They take him to an insane asylum, and the first day he's there, he refuses to eat the food because he wants kosher food. It's a Goyish facility. They're not equipped to give him kosher food. So, temper tantrum, hunger strike, right? Doesn't look good. It's very awkward. So they have one Jewish doctor on their staff. They call this doctor, and they ask him to persuade Mr. Goldberg to relent. Not successful. They have to bus in, till they reorganize, they're going to have to bus in kosher food from a distant facility. It's very expensive and very, very costly in time. Come Shabbos, the doctor's walking around the grounds of the hospital, and he sees Goldberg leaning back in a lawn chair, smoking a big cigar. And he says to him, Goldberg, you made me miserable demanding kosher food. Now you lie there smoking a cigar on Shabbos? He said, remember, doctor, I'm Meshuggah. That's, in fact, our definition of Avera. But the shtus has become amplified and shared because of the media. And shtus can become a reality. for those people who think reality is based on the globs that pose as blogs. Okay, Erev Tov.